There is a difference between fear and dread. Fear ends. Dread lingers. Long after the lights come back on, long after the door is locked, long after you've told yourself it was nothing. The stories on this channel are not built for fear. You've found Retribution Wire. 3 accounts tonight. 3 places. 3 people who learned, too late, that some doors should never be opened. Stay until the end. Millbrook State Hospital closed its doors in 1994. For 30 years, it has sat exactly as it was left. Gurneys still in hallways, patient files still in cabinets, an entire wing untouched since the final evacuation order. Urban explorers love it. Paranormal teams love it. Security guards do not. In 2021, a private security firm hired 3 night guards to patrol the property after a string of break-ins. Within 4 months, all 3 had quit. One of them gave a recorded statement before he left, the only account of what actually happened on the night shift at Millbrook. This is that account. His name was Dale, 41 years old, former police officer, the kind of man who didn't scare easily. 15 years on patrol in Philadelphia had seen to that. He took the Millbrook job for the pay. Overnight security, 8 p.m. to 6 a.m., 3 nights a week. Simple work, he assumed. Walk the perimeter, check the doors, log the rounds. The first 2 weeks were uneventful. Dale described the building as exactly what you'd expect. Peeling paint, broken windows boarded over, the particular smell that abandoned institutional buildings get, somewhere between mildew and dust. He carried a flashlight, a radio, and very little fear. That changed on his 9th shift. Dale's patrol route took him through the East Wing, the former long-term patient ward, at approximately 1 a.m. each night. The wing had 30 rooms along a single corridor, each door long since removed for salvage, leaving open frames into darkness. On the 9th shift, walking the corridor, Dale's flashlight caught movement in room 14. He stopped, held the light steady. Nothing. He told himself it was a bird, a rat, debris shifting. He continued his round. 2 nights later, same corridor, same time. He heard it before he saw anything. A sound from room 14, rhythmic, repetitive. He described it later as sounding like someone dragging a chair leg across a tile floor, over and over, in a steady, unbroken rhythm. He approached the doorway. The room was empty, bare concrete, a single rusted bed frame bolted to the floor, nothing else. The dragging sound stopped the moment his flashlight crossed the threshold. Dale logged it as nothing. Old buildings settle. Pipes make noise. He'd convinced himself of this by the time he clocked out. The pattern escalated over the following month. The sound in room 14 became a nightly occurrence, always beginning around 1 a.m., always stopping the instant Dale's light entered the room. He began timing his rounds to avoid the East Wing during that hour, a small act of avoidance he didn't examine too closely. Then, on his 23rd shift, the radio in his hand crackled with static, and a voice came through. Not the dispatch line, a direct transmission on his frequency that should have been impossible given the radio equipment in use. The voice said a name. Clearly, distinctly. It was the name of a Millbrook patient who had died in room 14 in 1987, information Dale had no way of knowing, which he only confirmed weeks later after researching the facility's hospital records, obtained through a public archive request made after he'd already quit. The patient's name was Walter Pruitt. He had been a long-term resident of the facility for 19 years, diagnosed with a condition the 1980s records described in clinical language Dale didn't fully understand, but which amounted to a profound and permanent break from reality. Pruitt died in his bed in room 14 of a cardiac event during the night shift found by an orderly during morning rounds. The radio transmission said his name once, clearly, and then dissolved into the same dragging, rhythmic static Dale had been hearing from the room for weeks. Dale's final shift was his 31st. He entered the east wing at his usual time. The dragging sound was already audible from the corridor entrance, louder than he had ever heard it, no longer confined to room 14, but seeming to move with him as he walked, tracking his position down the hallway. He reached room 14. The sound stopped. And then, from directly behind him, from the empty corridor he had just walked through, the dragging sound began again. Close. Far closer than room 14 could account for. Dale did not turn around. He ran. He left the building through the nearest fire exit, sat in his car in the parking lot for 40 minutes, and called his supervisor at 5 a.m. to resign effective immediately. He gave one statement to a paranormal research team, who later investigated the property, the only formal account of his experience, given on the condition that his last name never be published. He said, "I've dealt with armed suspects. I've dealt with people having the worst night of their life. None of that compares to a sound that knows when you're listening and stops on purpose." The east wing of Millbrook remains officially condemned. The security firm has not been able to retain a guard for longer than 6 weeks since. If you're exploring abandoned buildings, and the urge to is understandable, the history in these places is real. Bring a partner. Don't go alone. And if you hear something that stops the exact moment you notice it, that's not coincidence. That's intention. That was Millbrook. Our next story takes us away from old buildings and abandoned wards into something far more ordinary. A car, a late-night ride, a stranger in the backseat. Because sometimes the places we should be most afraid of aren't the ones with a history. They're the ones we step into every single day without a second thought. Rideshare drivers complete millions of trips every single day across the United States and the UK. Most are unremarkable. A destination, a conversation or silence, a 5-star rating, the next fare. A rideshare driver working nights in a mid-sized American city to pay for graduate school picked up what she later described to investigators as the only fare in 3 years of driving that made her quit the app permanently. That same night, before her shift had even ended. This is what happened in the back seat of her car. The driver, we'll call her Sarah at her request, had been driving for the app for just over 2 years by the time of this incident. She worked the late shift, 10 p.m. to 4 a.m., because the fares paid better, and her graduate program kept her daytime hours full. She had developed, the way most experienced drivers do, a set of instincts about passengers. Who was drunk and harmless, who was drunk and a problem, who simply wanted to talk, and who wanted silence. At 1:50 a.m. on a Thursday in March, she accepted a fare from an address in a quiet residential neighborhood. The pickup location was unusual, only in that the app showed no name attached to the booking, a glitch she'd seen occasionally, usually resolved by the passenger confirming verbally on pickup. She pulled up outside a small single-story house, porch light off, no lights visible inside. A woman was already standing at the curb, waiting. Mid-30s, Sarah estimated, wearing a long coat despite the mild spring weather. She got into the back seat without being asked to confirm her name, which Sarah noted, but didn't find alarming enough to refuse the fare. The destination was a hospital 14 minutes away, a common enough request at that hour. The first thing Sarah noticed was the temperature. Within 90 seconds of the woman entering the car, the interior temperature dropped noticeably enough that Sarah checked her dashboard display, assuming the air conditioning had somehow activated. It had not. The car's climate control showed the heater running, as she'd had it set all night. She glanced in the rearview mirror. The woman was sitting perfectly still, hands folded in her lap, looking straight ahead. Not out the window, not at her phone, just forward, toward the back of Sarah's headrest. Sarah made conversation, as she usually did. Asked how the woman's night was going. The woman didn't respond. Sarah tried once more, then let it go, assuming exhaustion or a difficult night were keeping her passenger quiet. 4 minutes into the drive, Sarah checked the mirror again. The woman's eyes were open, fixed directly on the back of Sarah's head, unblinking, as far as Sarah could tell in the dim light. Sarah turned the radio on, a habit she used to fill silence on quiet rides. The moment the radio came on, static replaced the station entirely. Every station she tried, the same wall of static, despite full signal showing on her phone's connected display. She turned the radio off. At the 8-minute mark, the woman spoke for the first time. Her voice, Sarah said, was flat in a way she couldn't fully describe afterward. Not robotic exactly, but missing something a normal human voice carries. Some quality of breath or warmth that Sarah only noticed by its absence. The woman said, "You can let me out here." They were nowhere near the hospital. They were on an overpass above a stretch of undeveloped land. No buildings, no lights, nothing for half a mile in any direction. Sarah, trying to stay calm, explained they hadn't reached the destination yet. The woman repeated the same sentence, in the exact same tone, the exact same flatness. "You can let me out here." Sarah pulled over. She has told investigators since that she still doesn't fully understand why she complied, rather than driving straight to the hospital regardless. Only that something about being told a third time, when she glanced again at the mirror, and the woman's eyes had not moved or blinked once during the entire 8-minute drive, made refusing feel suddenly, deeply unwise. The woman got out. Sarah watched in her side mirror as the woman walked toward the railing of the overpass, toward the edge, where there was nothing beyond but a 40-foot drop to the undeveloped land below. Sarah, panicking, called out the window for her to stop. The woman turned around at the railing's edge. For the first time, Sarah says, she could see the woman's face fully in her headlights. She had no visible breath in the cold night air. None. Despite the temperature drop Sarah had measured throughout the entire ride. The woman smiled, then stepped backward over the railing. Sarah slammed the car into park and ran to the edge, certain she was about to witness or be responsible for reporting a fall. There was nothing below, no body, no sound of impact, just the dark, undeveloped land, exactly as empty as it had been before. Sarah called 911 immediately. Police searched the area for 2 hours with flashlights and a drone with thermal imaging. Nothing was found. No evidence anyone had been there. No name had ever been confirmed for the booking. The app's records showed the ride had been requested from an account created that same night, with a payment method that, when investigators traced it, belonged to a deactivated card associated with a woman who had died 4 years earlier in a car accident on that same overpass. Sarah deleted the Rideshare app within the week. She has not driven for any platform since. If you drive Rideshare, trust the instinct that tells you something is wrong before your mind has found the words for it. And if a passenger asks you to stop somewhere with no destination in sight, you are allowed to say no. That was Sarah's story. Our final account tonight moves indoors, into a house, a family, and a room that was locked for a reason no one alive could explain. Because sometimes the inheritance you're given isn't just property. Sometimes it's a responsibility someone else has been carrying for far longer than you know. Inheriting a family property sounds, on paper, like good fortune, a house, land, a connection to a family history you may never have known in detail. For a woman from Leeds, inheriting her great-aunt's countryside estate in Yorkshire seemed, at first, like exactly that kind of fortune. What she found in the house's locked study has been examined by historians, a structural surveyor, and, eventually, the police. This is her account. We'll call her Claire at her request. She had met her great-aunt Margaret perhaps 4 times in her life, a distant, formal relative who lived alone in a house Claire's family rarely discussed and never visited. When Margaret passed away at 91, the solicitor's letter naming Claire as sole inheritor of Thornfield House came as a genuine surprise. Claire had assumed, if she thought about it at all, that some more closely connected relative would receive the estate. The house itself was exactly what the name suggested. A substantial stone property dating to the early 1800s, set well back from the nearest road, surrounded by overgrown gardens that had clearly not been maintained in years. Claire visited first with the solicitor to complete the paperwork and walk the property. The solicitor mentioned, almost as an aside, that one room, Margaret's study on the 2nd floor, had been locked for as long as anyone could remember, and that the keys had never been located among Margaret's possessions. Claire thought little of it at the time. A locked room in an old house seemed unremarkable. She returned 3 weeks later to begin clearing the property for sale. It was during this visit, working with a locksmith to open the various locked spaces throughout the house, that the study door was finally opened. The locksmith, Claire recalled, hesitated noticeably once the mechanism gave way, commenting that the lock itself was unusual, fitted from the inside in a way that suggested it had been installed not to keep intruders out, but to keep something contained within. The room itself was undisturbed. Heavy curtains, kept permanently drawn, had preserved the space in near-perfect darkness for what the dust pattern suggested was decades. A writing desk sat against the far wall. Bookshelves lined 2 sides of the room, filled with journals, dozens of them, spanning, Claire would later discover, nearly 70 years of her great-aunt's life. And on the desk, centered precisely, sat a single leather-bound book distinct from the others. Older. Its cover bore no title, only an embossed symbol Claire didn't recognize, a circle containing a series of interlocking lines. Claire began reading the journals over the following weeks. The early entries from Margaret's 20s were unremarkable. Daily life, family matters, the ordinary record-keeping of a woman documenting her years. But the tone shifted dramatically in entries from Margaret's early 30s, coinciding, Claire noted, with the death of Margaret's own mother, Claire's great-great-grandmother. The entries described, in increasingly detailed and increasingly disturbing language, a presence Margaret believed had entered the house following her mother's death. Not a ghost in any traditional sense Margaret described, but something she referred to repeatedly, across thousands of pages, only as the tenant, an entity she believed had attached itself to the property generations earlier, and which required, in Margaret's words, acknowledgement to remain passive. The journals detailed a private ritual Margaret performed nightly in the locked study for the remainder of her life, a practice she described as maintaining a boundary, never elaborated on beyond cryptic references to candlelight, salt, and the recitation of a specific verse Margaret had apparently composed herself in her 30s and never altered for the following 6 decades. Claire, by her own account, found the journals deeply unsettling, but assumed they documented a relative's struggle with mental health rather than anything supernatural. A reasonable conclusion, she noted, until she experienced 3 consecutive nights alone in the house while continuing the clearance work. On the first night, Claire woke at exactly 3 a.m. to the sound of footsteps on the floor above her bedroom, directly above, in the location of the locked study she had since reopened and left unlocked. She found nothing when she checked. The room was empty, exactly as she'd left it. On the second night, the same footsteps, the same hour. This time, when she checked, she found the leather-bound book from the desk had been moved, now resting open on the floor in the center of the room. To a page Claire was certain she had not been reading. The page contained handwriting she did not recognize as her great-aunt's increasingly shaky later script. It was different, older, more formal, and dated nearly 40 years before Margaret had even been born. On the third night, Claire did not wait for the footsteps. She left the house at 11 p.m. and did not return until daylight. Claire consulted a local historian about the property's history before continuing. The historian's research revealed that Thornfield House had been built on the site of an earlier structure, a smaller cottage, demolished in the 1790s, that local parish records associated with a woman tried and acquitted of practicing witchcraft in 1789, on the basis, the surviving court documents noted, of insufficient evidence rather than innocence determined. The woman had died in the cottage 2 years after her trial, under circumstances the parish register recorded only as unexplained. Claire has since sold Thornfield House at a significant financial loss, completing the sale within 4 months of inheriting it, to a buyer she has had no further contact with. She kept only one item from the entire estate, Margaret's final journal entry, written the week before her death, which Claire has shared with only a handful of people. It read simply, "I have done what I can for as long as I was able. I am sorry to whoever reads this next. The acknowledgement must continue. Do not let the room stay empty. It does not like being forgotten." If you inherit a property with a room someone kept locked for decades, that lock existed for a reason. Some boundaries were never meant to be tested out of curiosity. Tonight's accounts prove that cross the wrong person or look too closely into the darkness, and retribution is absolute. If you want to see what happens when secrets can no longer remain buried, click the case file on your screen right now and subscribe to The Wire so you never miss a descent into the unknown. 3 accounts. 3 places most people will never think twice about. A closed hospital, the back seat of a car, a locked room in an inherited house. That's what makes these stories the ones that stay with you. They don't require ancient curses or faraway destinations. They could be next door. If something tonight connects with something you know, my contact is in the description. No name required. Subscribe for new stories every day. Stay careful, stay curious, and never stop asking questions.